It is the second day of the Tata Steel 2021 Chess Tournament, an over-the-board classical-style chess event with 100 minutes per player, 50 minutes once they make it to the 40th move added onto both clocks, and then 15 more minutes on the 60th move. Magnus Carlsen, many other Grandmasters competing, and every day I will pull out a few games that are interesting, that are fun. There's only 7 games every round, so it's not so, not such an easy task, but also not such a difficult task all the same. So we're going to begin with Magnus Carlsen, playing Spanish Grandmaster David Anton, Guijarro, it's Spanish, but we have a Sicilian on the board, and Knight C3. So, kind of like a tricky move order, basically now leaving it in Black's hands to decide whether to play the move E5 or not. If E5 is played by Magnus Carlsen, then this is going to be a grasp over the center, and the game will be very close. But Magnus goes for G6, and plays into an accelerated Dragon Sicilian. This is what this is called. It's a great opening, by the way. If you want to do something after this, go look up the accelerated Dragon Sicilian, and maybe incorporate it into your repertoire. But normally Magnus Carlsen doesn't play G6 in the Sicilian. In fact, he almost never plays G6 in the Sicilian, which is why this is unique. It's unique territory for Magnus. Now here, generally, white decides whether to castle queenside by moving the queen pawn and launching some sort of attack, by playing bishop e2 and castling short. David Anton plays knight b3, d6, and f3. So of course f3 stopping the knight from jumping. Magnus here, doing typical Magnus things, and he plays the move bishop to e6, and queen d2 and d5, opening the center of the board with some trades. After bishop b5, which is already brand new position for the Sicilian, we get take, 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 take. And then bishop back to d7, long castles, knight jumping out to g4. Bishop goes to c5 to avoid danger, and Magnus plays a move which makes sense if I explain it, but to the untrained eye looks like it's just simply a bogus move, and it's the move bishop takes knight. You say, well, Levy, what the hell is that? Why would he do that? That's the bishop. You built a house for the bishop. Now, what is this? So he makes this trade because it damages white's structure. It now leaves white with 3 pawn islands. That's what they are called. They are isolated pawns. Whether they're, doubled, stuck one after the other, doesn't really matter. They could be targets for the endgame. And then Magnus plays b6, forcing the bishop to retreat because it had no other safe square. If it went this way, the knight would have jumped in, forking the 2 rooks. So knight goes to e5, bishop backs up, and these guys really nasty bind on the position with the horses. Brings his bishop out in a very strange way to a4. This allows David to play bishop to d4, attacking the knight. We get a trade, and now kind of a nice idea here by Magnus. Rook takes d4. The rook is hanging, so Magnus can also play e5, which is defended, attacking the bishop. But then when the bishop goes back, the next move for white is h3 to just kick the knight away, then you bring your bishop out, and Magnus evaluated his chances here as not as good as if he sacrifices, because really, after this, you have the fork, and after this, you are losing your rook. So it's not really a sacrifice, but it transforms the position into this. Knight c1 and king e7. A typical Magnesian-style endgame where he has a couple of things. When you're looking at an endgame, you're looking at a couple of things first and foremost. Number 1, who is up material? In this case, nobody. But you think that that's an important thing. Who's up a pawn? Who's up a knight for, 2 pawns? Number 2 is activity. Who's got the more active pieces? And it's Black. I mean, Black's got a rook coming to the open file for now. Pretty active bishop. Pawn structure. White has doubled central pawns, so could be a target for the rook if they are not defended. And pawn structure also means which side of the board are there more pawns on. This is called a queenside majority. So 2-on-1 is what this is called. Higher chance of creating a pass pawn to make it to the end of the board. Magnus begins his, operations. a4, nice trick. David Anton was sharp in his defense. You cannot take this because I have rook a1 coming, and I'm going to pick up your a7 pawn. David Anton wants to leave Magnus with a b pawn, not with an a pawn. Right? He wants him to leave it with a b pawn because it's closer to the king, closer to the other pieces. Magnus was working hard. Rook b1, fe4, undoubling the structure, then e5. Nice little sacrifice there of a pawn. If it gets taken, the king can come up and take it, leaving the e4 pawn a little bit weak. But after e5, David Anton didn't bite, and he just brought his king forward. Rook comes to c5, knight d5, king f7. But now it's not even so clear who's attacking who. You try too hard to win, you might end up losing the game. And the rest of the endgame is kind of a lot of shuffling. Magnus trying to, he ends up winning the pawn, but he loses his b pawn, but in a disadvantageous way, in a way that even though he's a pawn up, and he's creating some chances for himself, this a pawn's not going anywhere. Rook h2, rook a6, and you do it like this. Now, what's funny here is that if check was played, which looks like it does something, I counter check you, you take my knight, I take your bishop, you take, and then here, rather than going here and losing the game, there's king to f4. And if you haven't seen king and rook endgames, I have a video on it. This is just a draw. You are going to lose the e-pawn, and the h-pawn back here will not win. There is a defensive schematic that David Anton will follow. So Magnus worked hard. He did create some chances, and he actually created chances ultimately with these 2 pawns on this side of the board. But David Anton was creative. He played actively. His king was all over the place. His pawn started walking at the end, and you see that Magnus never really could untangle here from his kind of like little web. Ultimately, he had to trade off, and this endgame just ended with the kings on the 69th move of the game. Magnus doing his best. I have to include a Magnus game. I mean, he's the greatest player in the world, potentially, of all time, so he always comes to fight. Even games that he plays that ends in draws can be very, very interesting and instructive. But the remaining 2 games, ladies and gentlemen, will be bloodbaths. First, we will go to the game between Jan Krzysztof Duda and Niels Grandelius. Krzysztof Duda is like top 10, top 15 in the world, #1 in Poland, high 2700s, and the last person to defeat Magnus Carlsen in a long game. This one was a symmetrical English opening, knight f3, knight c6, and b3, e5, bishop b2, d6. You notice that Duda is playing kind of a weird setup. He's not putting any pawns in the center, so Niels says, okay, man, I'm going to put my pawns in the center. Both players developing castles, d3, and rook b8. The whole point of rook to b8, first of all, you want to go a6 and b5 to play on the queen side, and second of all, in the future, you don't want anything to do on this diagonal with this light squared bishop. That is why he played the move rook to b8. Knight comes back to e1, bishop finishes his development, and queen d7. Again, queen and bishop battery, they want to go down to h3. So knight to c2, bishop to h3, there will be a trade. That is exactly what happens. And now, if you'd like to create winning chances on the same side of the board as your opponent, you have to attack their king with the move f5. This is, of course, the best move. It is not weakening the king in the slightest, because the only thing that can attack you is the knight. You will just take. Duda, however, not really phased and plays the move b4. Duda is trying to create play on the other side of the board, but Niels plays f4. And at first glance, you can take, but you cannot because the queen comes to g4. Check. And picking up the knight. Not to mention that there is a bishop on the other side. So this move order, there is bishop takes b2, but for example, if take, and then knight f4, there's queen to g4. Sometimes I speak too fast and I say stupid things. B takes c5, d takes c5, and e4, trying to hold it all together. Yeah, but now f3. Uh-oh. King to h1, knight to d4. Oh, this is not good. Take, knight e3. Duda wants to replace the knight that just disappeared, but the queen slides over to d7. The queen's ready to arrive on the light squares. Instructive moment of trading your opponent's bishop away from the defense of their king. Take, knight jumps into d5. Now, at first glance, this position actually looks pretty good for Duda. The problem is, it doesn't look good. I mean, it looks good, but it's not good at all. Rook goes to e8, rook to g1, the queen arrives on g4. You notice how this is very unpleasant right now? This is the best knight of all time, except for the fact that it's not doing anything. It's so nice. No one can touch it. Except no one cares about it, because I'm gonna hunt down the king. Queen goes back to d1, rook comes to e5. Knight to f4, let me kick this knight out with my pawn. So Duda plays the move h3. Queen goes back to d7. Uh-oh. If you move the knight, this pawn is lost. Now, if we go back a few moves, the move that really lost Duda the game was the move queen to d1. He thought for a while he played king, queen d1. Apparently, his best move was queen a5. Why? Because if black plays the move rook e5, knight f4, g5, all the same moves. In this position, white has the absolutely savage defensive resource, queen to c7. If pawn takes, knight, pawn takes, you have suddenly opened up your own attack to your own position. So you cannot take the knight. And if you play rook f7 to defend yourself, I go check, you block, and I go back. And you go here, check, and block this way, you still cannot take. So computer finds just an absolutely savage idea, queen a5, rook here and here, and you cannot take the knight because you would open up the rook with the queen. So active defense there was necessary in the game. Instead, Duda absolutely slaughtered on the king side, and Niels now has an extra bishop. He brings his king out of the way of the rooks, solidifies his position, and on move 40, it was resignation time for Jan Krzysztof. NILS Grandelius, the early gladiator. What it says of the tournament. And he is 2 out of 2. Yesterday he won versus Anton Demchenko, and today maybe his highest rated classical chess win ever. Jan Krzysztof due to 2750, 2760 rated. So a very nice game for him, for NILS, and he continues to build his lead. He's trying to climb to the 2700 club. Big congrats. And for our final game of the day, we've saved it. Anton Demchenko, last minute replacement for Daniel Dubov, and Fabiano Caruana. Former World Championship challenger, contender, number 2 ranked player in classical in the world. We haven't seen him in any of these online Rapid and Blitz events of 2020. He's been cooking stuff up in the kitchen. The legal stuff he's been cooking up, not any illegal stuff. And he plays what's called a Slav defense. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, and bishop f5. This is called the quiet Slav, or the slow Slav. What kind of a Slav you know that's quiet? You ever see one of these Russian car videos? You know, with the boom and then the holes in the road. No, nobody quiet. Bishop e4. So white plays knight h4, early hunting for the bishop. Bishop e4, baiting the move f3 and sliding out of danger. It's a weird setup, and basically what white wants is to win the bishop and then castle long. And that's exactly what happens. Now, Fabiano, you would think, will want a castle or castle. Well, Fabi plays the move a6, which, you know, doesn't look like it's doing anything yet, but after g4, which is the first aggressive intention by white, Fabiano takes the pawn. And that forces bishop takes c4, because if you don't take it, I mean, I'm just going to defend it. So take b5. Bishop moves, and now Fabiano plays the move c5. You say, how does that make any sense? Wait, Levy, you keep telling me when my king is in the middle, I shouldn't open up the board. Well, the reason why this is fine is because these bishops can't really move. Like, you're hardly opening up anything. Oh, e4 and this and this. Yeah, well, black's gonna be, you know, attacking you as well. You're the one that's committed your king. Black's king is in the middle. So, Demchenko plays d5. Sorry, not Demchenko. Donchenko. Alexander Donchenko. There's another Grandmaster, Anton Demchenko, and I've been like mixing their names for the duration of this video. Donchenko, I apologize. So we get knight takes d5, a sacrifice of a pawn, and he plays the move f4, because he's got an idea to play f5, b3. Fabiano thinks for a while, plays the move b4. Why is this so good? Well, because this is called a pawn storm. You are trying to invade, and also you are trying to play queen a5, and that stopped the bishop from seeing that square. So we get e4. Now, what does a person who wants to create an attack want to do with the middle of the board? Do they want the center open or closed? They want the center closed. Shut down the center. Donchenko doesn't want the center shut down. He plays e5, knight b6, e6. If you take, queen takes g6 check. He says, queen d5, take my pawn, king f8. That is known as an umbrella pawn. Even though two things can take it, I can hide safely behind your own pawn. And if you spend a move playing something like queen g6, there's no threat here. Rook h6, kick you out, and then take on a2. Bam, bam, I'm attacking you. My king is safe. I don't care. I don't care about your pawn on f7. So we go back a few moves. King f8 was played in the game. h4. Donchenko is trying to fight. Queen, and you say, well, Levy, why didn't you start? Well, I mean, b3 is the most logical move. Yeah, but a5. Excuse me. Fabiano Caruana wasn't just going to sit there and go, oh, b3. Oh, look, how did I miss that? He's gonna cut your head off. Again, I keep making all these references. Fabiano's a perfectly law-abiding citizen. Not cooking up anything illegal in the kitchen, not cutting anybody's head off, actually. So, h4, queen takes a2, queen takes g6. And now, you know, the knight is hanging, but b3 played, because if you take the horse, there is back rank mate. So we get bishop to e1, a move which, well, you'll see in a second, activates the rook, and also can bring the rook here. Queen a1 is not mate, because the queen can come back, but let's not forget that Fabiano Caruana has more pieces. Rook takes d4, he sacrifices, but knight comes to a4. And the queen is attacking b2, so queen comes back to b1, and Fabiano Caruana here fakes the jab and comes over the top with he goes full Max Holloway. How was that for a current event? Max Holloway was so good against Calvin Kattar. Oh my God. Max Holloway. He plays bishop a3. Ouch. Point is, if you take the bishop, then I play b2. You have to defend your queen, so here, but then I check you. I have to go here and check, and the game's over. Because the king comes out, I get both pawns down, I have a check, I'm winning your queen. Bye-bye. So, queen takes a2, pawn takes a2. How do you stop the queen? Like this, king c2. What? Queen? Check. Sacrificing a piece, but discovered attack, winning the queen, and the game is still kind of going, even though, you know, Fabi has an extra knight. Fabi stays patient, doesn't cash in at the casino yet, plays the beautiful rook b8. Now bishop b4 is not possible because of rook takes, and if you take my bishop, I have check. Here, shh, game over. So after rook to b8, Donchenko has to play rook d8 check, sacrificing a rook. He takes, and again, you cannot queen, but c3. Oh! Closing the door on the bishop. Bishop comes out this way. Rook d2 check, defended by the pawn. King b3, and knight c5 check. And here Donchenko resigned because, well, frankly, what's he gonna do? If you play king to c4, attacking this, I can do a lot of things. I can take the bishop, I can move my knight, I can take and bring my rook. You are not going to stop both my passed pawns and a dreadful loss of material. Donchenko falls to 0-2 in his first two games. Fabiano Caruana wins his first game, and these are your standings after the first 2 days of the Tata Steel. NILS GRANDELIUS in first place with 2 out of 2. Very early to call him a favorite. He did beat 2 players who are obviously incredibly strong, but one of those players is currently suffering. And where's Donchenko on this list? Actually, okay, Donchenko has 0 points, but where is he? Did I cut him off? Oof. Well, if he ever watches this video, I'm very sorry, Alexander. Well, I don't know. Do we just end this now? What do we do? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. And recaps will be every single day. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I've got a lot of playlists of instructive content, openings, middle games, end games, you name it. Ladies and gentlemen, always a pleasure making these for you. And I will see you in the next one.